The Denver Broncos 2024 NFL schedule is officially out, and it's going to be a tough road for Sean Payton. Bo Nix here in 2024. We'll break down the entire schedule here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much once again to everybody in Broncos Country, all the everydayers out there who make us your first listen of the day every single day. You can get us for free on YouTube, or you can take us with you wherever you go, whether you're in your car in the morning, whether you're at the gym, free and available everywhere you get your podcast in audio format. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by Sayre Bedinger, site expert over there at predominantlyorange.com. Today's episode, Locked On Broncos, brought to you by our friends over there at the Game Time app. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, and a great time to get in on Game Time, especially with the NFL schedule release being official. We know who the Broncos are going to play here in 2024, and I tell you what, Sayre, it isn't going to be an easy road for the Broncos based on how the schedule is officially formatted. The Broncos set to face a tough road stretch, really, for them to open up the season here.
They are, Cody, and of course, it's going to start off with a road trip that's going to bring back maybe some memories here, a little deja vu. Week 1 road trip to Seattle to face off against the Seahawks, and I've got some fun thoughts on that particular game, Cody. I got a tweet from my good friend Brandon, who was saying, hey, it's like a revenge game between the two Russell Wilson exes, and it made me think of the episode of The Office where Dwight and Andy are fighting over Angela, right? And then Angela's like, well, you guys keep competing, and they're like, wait a second, why are we fighting against each other? We don't, neither of us want you anymore. So it's, the NFL is fun like that, but I don't mind the Broncos starting off like that, right? I mean, you wanted to see that Russell Wilson matchup as early as possible, and hey, looks like we're getting it in week 2 as Russell makes his return to the Mile High City as a member of the Pittsburgh Steelers, followed by a week 3 road trip to Tampa Bay, and then week 4 going to the New York Jets. So you look at that first stretch of games, Cody, that's where we say that the Broncos are facing a tough road stretch to open up this season. I mean, you've got road trips to Seattle, Tampa Bay in that September Florida heat, and then up to New York in week 4. That's the 3 of the top 12 defenses in last year's NFL that you have to go on the road against and play in the first 4 weeks of the season.
Well, not to mention, your first 3 of your first 4 games are going to be road games. So you're going to have to be battle tested a little bit. We know that Denver's going to have more road games this season than they had away games with the new NFL scheduling format, how they did that because they had a lot of home games last year in comparison. But I mean, ideally, I think this is a very, very interesting start here for the Broncos. Look, I think we can look at some key matchups when you look at that week 1 game against the Seahawks. Of course, we're going to be looking at PS2 versus DK Metcalf this time around. The Broncos no longer have Nathaniel Hackett. They're no longer have Brandon McManus. So you're not going to have to worry about a 64-yard field goal at the end of the regulation there. The Broncos, that's going to be a fun matchup there. Russell Wilson coming back to town. How is he going to be received by Broncos Country? Surely it's going to be a raucous environment at Empower Field. But then you mentioned that 2-game road stretch, back-to-back road games, weeks 3 and weeks 4 there. Tampa Bay, a playoff team last year, really revitalized by Baker Mayfield. They've got Mike Evans back in the mix this year. Then the New York Jets, a little bit early on. Aaron Rodgers, I mean, we anticipate it's going to be healthy at that juncture there. What's going to be the story for them? Because the Jets also have a little bit of a tough opening to their season schedule as well. So got to get those road games out of the way a little bit early on. I was actually relieved that this New York game wasn't later on in the year where it was potentially going to be cold in New York. You know how it gets there, or windy at that point in time. But let's get to the other games here. Obviously, when we look at weeks 5 and week 6, the Broncos will have back-to-back home games against AFC West divisional rivals. Home against the Las Vegas Raiders, whoever's going to be under center for them, whether that's Aiden O'Connell or Gardner Minshew, and then week 6 against Justin Herbert, and now Jim Harbaugh as that team's head coach. And a lot of people are crowning the Chargers as winners of the offseason. Denver getting some of these AFC games. I mean, let's look at the schedule here once again. I mean, I think you look at Pittsburgh, you look at New York, Vegas, you look at the Chargers. Denver has a multitude of conference games right there that they absolutely need to take care of early on in terms of conference record. You're going to be talking about tiebreakers potentially earlier. You want to have an advantage in your rankings there, whether it's against division, whether it's against conference, and it isn't going to come easy. I mean, ideally, the first 6 games for the Broncos, I mean, Sayre, if you look at it, that is a very, very tough stretch. And right now, we're all factoring in. We don't know, is Bo Nix going to be the week 1 starter? That's the biggest question that we have right now as it pertains to the schedule and maybe how things will play out. But not easy here for Sean Payton and Bo Nix.
No, and we didn't expect that, right? When we did our schedule prediction episode, you and I were kind of talking about that. It feels like whatever combination comes out is always going to be difficult. When you're playing in the AFC nowadays, it's going to be the murderer's row list of quarterbacks that you're going up against most every week. And so I agree with you. I think getting the Jets early on in the season is nice. Getting the Steelers early on in the season is also nice, because those are 2 teams that, quite frankly, they're all going to have to get used to their quarterback, right? I mean, Russell Wilson, he's brand new. Aaron Rodgers, none of those guys didn't get a chance to play with him last year. So it's going to be a lot of new breaking in. Could be new for the Seahawks as well. I mean, Sam Howell could take that starting QB job there. We don't know. So I don't mind the stretch to begin the season. Obviously you don't love every road trip there. I mean, with the Steelers, Bucks, and Jets in the first 4 games, like I said, that's 3 of the top 12 scoring defenses from last year, and 3 defenses that are probably going to be good all year, regardless of who the quarterback is. So they're going to be tough for a rookie quarterback, but I like that you get 4 of, maybe if I can call it this, Cody, 4 of maybe the easier AFC matchups early in the season, right? Because Sean Payton historically has been much better after September than he is in September. And so you need to get off to a good start, and you get those matchups against the Steelers, who we believe they're in the same boat as the Broncos right now in terms of where they were at last year. The Jets, who, the Broncos played them tough last year, even with the way Russell was playing and things like that. So you get those, and then the Chargers and Raiders. I mean, those are the Raiders game. The Broncos need to go out and win those 2 divisional games. You get 2 division games amongst these first 6, 4 AFC matchups. It's going to be critical for the Broncos to get off to a hot start, even with that tough road stretch in the first 4.
Well, that's the first 6 weeks of the Broncos season. What does week 7 through 12 entail, including a Thursday night football game that features Sean Payton going back to the house that he built with the New Orleans Saints? You'll get that and much more on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. Broncos Country, today's episode, Locked On Broncos, is brought to you by our friends over there at the Game Time app, and the NFL schedule is officially revealed. And if you want to go see the Denver Broncos take on the Seattle Seahawks in week 1 of the NFL season, Game Time is the place to get in and get your tickets, and make sure you also get the best view inside of the house, because with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time, they take the guesswork out of buying NFL tickets. We talk about the Broncos at the Seahawks. Well, what if you want to attend a primetime game where the Broncos travel to New Orleans to take on the Saints as Sean Payton returns in week 7? Game Time, they're going to have the tickets there as well. The best prices overall. And the one thing I like about it, you can see what your view from your seat is going to be like with their seat view feature inside of the app, where you get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you even buy your tickets. So if you want to know what the action is going to be like, that is where you go. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
Sean Payton and all his Saints buddies are going back to New Orleans in week 7 for a primetime matchup between the Denver Broncos and the New Orleans Saints. Cody and I are going to break down weeks 7 through 12 of the Denver Broncos 2024 schedule on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. And we want to say thank you to every single one of you that makes Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day. For all of you that take us with you in the car, to your workouts, at the grocery store, however you choose to listen, free and available on all platforms. We appreciate every single one of you. And if you're joining over on YouTube, the growing community there, man, mile high salute to all of you. And as the schedule has now been released, you all can start making plans. If you're going to go to Broncos games, if you got to take certain weekends off of work because there's a Broncos game, now you can do that. But you aren't going to have to take a weekend off. You might want to take a Friday Friday off of work because the Broncos play the New Orleans Saints on a Thursday night matchup, week 7, the highly anticipated return of Sean Payton to New Orleans.
This is going to be the story. Now, obviously, I feel like it's tough. It's a tough juncture. I mean, we already know the Broncos schedule is difficult enough as is. Ideally for Denver, you have that week 6 game that you play in an AFC West divisional rival. You're going to have back-to-back games there, but it's like, okay, then you have a short turnaround. You always know those AFC West games, they're physical, they're tough, they're nasty, they're highly competitive, and then you have a short turnaround to go play the Saints in New Orleans, where we all know, like, oh, their defense is always strong. They have very, very talented players. You're going to be going up against Cam Jordan this year. They're hoping that they can stay healthy on that side of the ball. You're going to have to go against Marshawn Lattimore if you're, Bo Nix and you're trying to throw to your receivers. Like, you're going to have a tough variety of options here. But I think the story is going to be, okay, hey, Sean going back to New Orleans. That's going to be the talk all week long. Sean's not going to make a big deal out of it, but it's a big storyline. The NFL, they want that in the headlines. This is one of the 2 only nationally televised games that the Broncos will have this season. We'll tell you what the other one is a little bit later here as this episode is going about here. But Thursday Night Football, I'm still a big believer. I wish it was coming off of a bye week. And we'll tell you where Denver's bye week is. Obviously, if you're, week 14, that's coming up. We'll dive deep into that. But I'm a little frustrated by the standpoint that Denver is going to have a tough physical game. I don't know I haven't looked at the Saints schedule and the build up to that. I mean, I always like to know when Denver's playing a Thursday night game, okay, what was the opponent's schedule beforehand? Are the Saints going to be coming off a bye? Obviously that stuff will be out here a little bit later. But for me, I just find it a little frustrating that this has to be a Thursday night game. Why couldn't this be like a Sunday night game or a Monday night game for Sean Payton? Instead, it's got to be a Thursday night game. And of course, short week, guys going to be banged up. I don't like it. That's my only gripe on it. But let's open up the rest of the second half schedule here. Week 8, Denver does have a home game. Look, you're going to have back-to-back NFC South games. Obviously, week 7 against the Saints, Thursday Night Football. Week 8, you're going to be taking on former Broncos defensive coordinator Ejiro Evero, former Broncos linebacker Josie Jewell. They make their return to Denver when the Broncos host the Carolina Panthers. But can we talk about this absolutely brutal stretch for a 2-week span here coming up for the Broncos in week 9 and week 10? You have back-to-back road games, 1 against the Baltimore Ravens, 2 against the Kansas City Chiefs in week 9, week 10. That right there is a crucial juncture. And that to me is going to very much, in my opinion, that stretch is going to define the Broncos season in some way, shape, or form.
It's kind of nice. The only positive about it, Cody, is really that it's happening in the middle of the season where you have time to kind of get back on track afterwards. It's not like this is the final 2 games to end the season, which is a benefit to the Broncos. But you and I talked about this in the schedule prediction episode that we did of how brutal playing back-to-back road games against the Ravens and Chiefs would be. I mean, the fact that it's a reality for the Denver Broncos this year is a little tough to swallow, because you anticipate that they're going to have to win a game that they're supposed to lose at that point, or a game that they would be expected to lose. They're going to have to overachieve. Just like, remember last year, everybody had in Sharpie the team's road trip to Buffalo as a Sharpied in loss at the beginning of the year when the schedules came out. It's going to have to be one of those type of situations there, and you may not get the mulligan at the end of the game to kick a field goal again. So I think the Broncos could surprise some people with one of those games. You just never know. But you look at that and you see, I mean, back-to-back games on the road against Baltimore, Kansas City. Those are 2 teams that represented the AFC late into the season last year, and of course, Kansas City is the reigning Super Bowl champion. So I don't love that stretch right there. I agree with you too about having that Thursday night game coming off a game where you play the Chargers, and we know Jim Harbaugh, he likes to play physical. They're going to be aggressive. They are going to be tougher in the trenches on both sides of the ball this year. So that you're coming off of a physical game going into a Thursday night game against New Orleans, who, I mean, they played some good defense last year, and their offense at times could put up 40 plus points. So it's going to be a fascinating stretch. You have to beat those NFC or those AFC opponents early in the season because of that. So as you look at that Ravens versus the Chiefs consecutive road games, that to me is the toughest point of this year for the Broncos, and they need to be good well before that.
Well, and obviously we're going to do another episode on tomorrow's episode, Lockdown Broncos, where we're going to really hyper analyze the toughest stretch of the season. How many Eastern time zone games will the Broncos be playing? What juncture? The thing about this schedule, like looking at us reacting to it fresh off of the release here, we're looking at everything and it's like, all right, with the rosters being scheduled as is, like the premier players on each team, barring injury, right? So much could change for the Broncos. So much could change for their opponents that they're going to be facing up until this stretch. At that point, we obviously hope everyone can stay healthy. That's going to be a big, big factor into the conversation whether or not Denver wins or loses games. But then you look after that Chiefs game, the Broncos will have a home game against Kirk Cousins and the Atlanta Falcons in week 11 before week 12. They're on the road at the Las Vegas Raiders. Look, we're not even close yet. Like, we're still 2 weeks away. Week 14, we know, is the bye week for Denver. Like, this is absolutely ridiculous schedule for Denver in terms of when you look at it on paper, toughness, right? And you're going to see a lot of conversations now that the schedule is out about, well, strength of schedule. The reality is, folks, strength of schedule means nothing. It's literally just a talking point for us. Like, we can reference it. But every year, the NFL changes. Teams change. Their circumstances, their roster. There's a large turnover rate. There's new coaches, new players coming into the mix. Ideally, when we look at, I think, the idea of strength of schedule, I think we have to look at, okay, starting quarterbacks for those teams that Denver is going to be playing. And when you look at the second half schedule alone, right now we anticipate week 7, Derek Carr. Week 8, Bryce Young, who's hoping to have a bounce back year. Week 9, Lamar Jackson. Week 10, Patrick Mahomes. Week 11, Kirk Cousins, who's just gotten funny money. And then the Raiders, a question mark is going to be Gardner Minshew. Is it going to be Aiden O'Connell? Or, is Tom Brady going to somehow come out of retirement and step into the mix for them at that point of the season? Anything is possible. But, man, I think we see the common exercise, and fans love to do this. And, look, it's fun, and they have every right to do that. When people try to predict the wins and losses right now, I just look at this schedule. I'm like, man, this is going to be, at least on paper right now, this is a gauntlet for the Broncos, especially if Bo Nix is the starting quarterback as a rookie. He's going to face some teams where he's going to take some lumps and he's going to face some adversity based on what you look at on paper alone.
The Broncos are going to have to be road warriors, Cody. I mean, as we look at weeks 1 through 12, I mean, on the road against the Seahawks, Bucks, Jets, Saints, Ravens, Chiefs, Raiders, that's a lot of those road games that you mentioned. The Broncos playing the extra one this season in terms of having that 17th game. The last year, the Broncos played that extra game at home. This year, they're playing it on the road, which would be that Seattle game because you're playing the NFC South. It's going to be important for them to establish themselves as road underdog warriors all throughout the course of this season. So you look at that early on in the year, the first 12 games, you're playing a majority of those road games. And coming up here, we've only got 2 more road games left on the slate. So that means that you're playing 7 road games amongst your first 12. You have to establish that you can go out and play well on the road, even on a short week, even when you don't have a bye week there before week 14, as you alluded to earlier, Cody. So it, like you said, we'll break down the tougher stretches of the season, but playing 7 road games out of your first 12, that is a fascinating situation for the Broncos to be in here.
Got to take care of business any way that you can if the Broncos are hoping to get back to the postseason. Well, how does Denver close out this season? Well, you know what? We talk about it being a gauntlet. Well, for the second half and the final portion of weeks 13 through week 18, it is a playoff gauntlet for the Broncos if they hope to get back into the postseason. We'll break down their opponents in that stretch here on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. Broncos Country, today's episode, Lockdown Broncos, is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel Sportsbook. And as you all know it, FanDuel, they are America's #1 sportsbook. And right now is the time to get in all the action because it is winner take all time right now in the NBA and the NHL as the playoffs continue. And FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. If you sign up as a brand new customer here today at FanDuel Sportsbook, you go in and you place a $5 bet on anything out there, whether it's money line, player props, stat projections, whatever it may be, and that bet wins. FanDuel is going to give you $150. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and make every playoff shot count. Once again, that's FanDuel.com/locked-on. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. The final portion of the Broncos 2024 NFL schedule is brutal. It is a playoff gauntlet. We'll break down every matchup, some of the key storylines right now, fresh off of the NFL schedule release. But real quick, we just wanted to say thank you so much to everybody in Broncos country, all the everydayers out there, all the brand new listeners or viewers of the show. If you're brand new to this, you love the energy that we bring, we always promise you every single day, all year long, when there's something going on with the Denver Broncos, you're going to get a brand new episode every single day. I cover the team daily in Dove Valley. There's practice reports, practice recaps. Sayre and I break down every storyline of this team from an objective point of view. And we appreciate you so much for rocking with us, whether you watch us on YouTube or whether you take us with you on the go, wherever you get your podcast. Thank you so much to all the everydayers in Broncos country. Let's dive into the final portion of the schedule here. I mean, obviously, we just talked about weeks 7 through 12. Obviously, Denver, that's a tough stretch for them, but weeks 13 through weeks 18, also a tough schedule here for the Broncos. You know, you're coming off that week 12 game. Now you're going to have week 13. It's a home game, Monday Night Football. The Broncos' second nationally televised game at this point. They're, one of only 2 nationally televised games that they have. When you look at the end stretch of the season, that could be potentially flexed into a primetime spot. We'll dive into that. But you're taking on the Cleveland Browns, another team who was in the playoffs last year, who arguably they're getting very, very good on the defensive side of the ball still. They've retained a lot of their key players on that side. The quarterback situation is obviously still a question mark, but obviously they have Jerry Jeudy. This is going to be where they face their former friend there in Jerry. Where's he going to line up? Obviously, there's Amari Cooper, who's very, very talented in Cleveland as well. I mean, this is a primetime potential playoff atmosphere that the Broncos are going to have here on Monday Night Football. What a tough way to start it. But I think the good news here, it leads into a week 14 bye, which I can't remember the last time the Broncos have had a bye week this late into the year. Could be beneficial, could also be something that hurts them, considering that, hey, what can you change 14 weeks into the season that's not working through the other portions of the season? You're just hoping to get healthy at this point, especially as the tougher stretch of the schedule does come up here for Denver.
Yeah, it's not an ideal placement for the bye week in terms of it being so late in the season, but playing that Thursday night game back in week 7, you do get the extra couple of days after that game, even though you're playing on a short week, so it kind of evens itself out. But so essentially after week 7, you'll have the shorter version of a, quote unquote bye week, and then week 14, you'll have one. So they kind of split it up decently there, but I'm glad, Cody, you used the picture of Pat Surtain for this particular graphic. For those not watching on YouTube, there's a picture of Pat Surtain rocking the throwback uniforms as we discussed that Cleveland Browns Monday night game. I would not be shocked. In fact, I might be shocked if the Broncos don't wear those throwbacks against the Browns, the uniforms that John Elway beat them in with the drive and all those old vintage AFC, championship matchups. So that could be the game that you circle as the Broncos rocking the throwback uniforms there Monday Night Football against the Browns. But after the week 14 bye, you come home, or you stay home after playing the Browns. You play the Indianapolis Colts, another team that was really tough last year, and especially just defensively making clutch plays on offense. They ran the ball extremely well under Shane Steichen. Anthony Richardson was not healthy for most of the year last year, but you kind of figure that team could take a substantial step forward if Richardson is able to stay healthy this year, because what we did see from him was very impressive, Cody. And then you get to that final stretch of the season, like you alluded to, the potential playoff gauntlet at the Chargers, at the Bengals, and then finishing out at home against the Chiefs. What stands out to you about these final few games here for the Denver Broncos, who hopefully will be still in the mix at this point in the year?
Well, your final 5 games of the year, they're all going to be AFC conference matchups. And look, once again, we talk about Denver was in a position last year where they could have, if they won several games, they would have had tiebreakers. They would have made it into the postseason if they won 1 or 2 games over teams that they should have beaten. And all of a sudden the conversation, maybe the excitement level for this year for the Broncos could be entirely different. And I think that there are a lot of Broncos fans who are generally excited. I can't help but say, but look at the schedule. There's excitement that the season is upon us, but there's also some caution, some, hey, be careful. This is a tough schedule for them. Not only that, you're playing really good quarterbacks. Anthony Richardson, young and upcoming. Deshaun Watson, if he was the Houston Texans, Deshaun Watson, I would say, okay, hey, that's going to be tough there. But you're playing Richardson, who's very talented. You're playing Justin Herbert. You're playing Joe Burrow, of all people. This time of the year at the end stretch, Joe Burrow is probably the most dangerous quarterback in the National Football League from what we've seen. Now, obviously, the Bengals didn't have that opportunity last year because he had the injury to his hand. That is a tough game. That right there could also be a game that gets flexed potentially into a Sunday night, maybe, Saturday night football type of situation there. And then you end the season with Patrick Mahomes. Like at this point, like if the Broncos are truly competitive, Sayre, and if they're winning games, and let's say that they're neck and neck with Kansas City, the stakes for that final game of the season are astronomically high. Now, let's say Kansas City, hypothetically, as most people assume, are going to be the leaders of the division once again. Well, then maybe they don't have much to play for in that game. And maybe the Broncos, if they're in a position where they're fighting for a playoff spot, a win will get them in, something along those lines. Or, maybe a win plus another team losing will get the Broncos maybe into a wild card. Like if that's where Denver's at in comparison to how they were last year, maybe the Chiefs sit their starters for that game, right? Maybe that's a benefit. Or maybe we see early on when Denver plays them, obviously in week 10, that maybe the Broncos slug them in the mouth. They're fighting. It's competitive. Like the Broncos have been able to compete with the Chiefs. They just haven't had a lot of success. And obviously their last game that they played, obviously was a win at home for the Denver. But for me, this is a very, very exciting matchup to end the season, but it's the toughest stretch. And this will be the area I think that really defines whether or not the Broncos will be a playoff team. We talked about some of the tougher games where obviously Denver has to win, but if Denver's in the conversation, how they end the season is going to be absolutely critical, determining their playoff chances, especially if Bo Nix gets the start as a rookie and for Sean Payton in his second year as being the team's head coach. The stakes are higher, but it also presents a lot of questions going into the offseason as well, where Denver's going to have a lot of flexibility from a financial aspect in terms of the salary cap. We talk about extensions for key guys. If Denver can be competitive here in 2024, Sayre, and they can win games, they can get into the postseason, then they embrace the offseason where they can absolutely, strengthen their arsenal even further, which I think would generate a lot of excitement at Broncos Country.
100%. You want to make sure that this season you have a good taste in your mouth at the end of it, especially if that means going to the playoffs. Even if you don't win in the playoffs, just getting there would be huge for the Broncos. So if that's going to happen, I mean, they're going to have 8 or 9 wins by the time they play the Bengals there in week 17. So how does that happen for the Broncos? Cody and I are going to talk about that as we continue to break down the schedule throughout the next, few days here. But I think if you can have 8 or 9 wins at that point, which is definitely easier said than done, it's easier to write down on paper than anything else. You go into those final 2 games against Joe Burrow and at home against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, or whoever in the Chiefs. It could be Carson Wentz and the Chiefs. We don't know yet. But at that point, if you have 8 or 9 wins, you set yourself up with a chance at the very least to finish with 9 or 10 wins in this season, which would be an improvement over what we saw last year. And even if this team can win 8 games, Cody, with a rookie quarterback at the helm, we hope for the majority or all of the season, I feel like that would be a substantial piece of proof that Sean Payton's way is working. If you have the same amount of wins this year as you did last year when it was a veteran-laden team, Russell Wilson under center, I think that would be huge for them to do. But getting to 8 or 9 wins going into that Cincinnati game, that's going to be critical if the Broncos are going to compete for a playoff spot this coming season.
Well, Broncos Country, we want to hear from you. What are your initial thoughts on the Broncos 2024 NFL schedule? For all you everydayers out there, here's what you can expect on tomorrow's brand new episode of Locked On Broncos, where we're going to dive deep into how many Eastern time zone games do the Broncos have? What is the most difficult stretch of the season? And how many wins will the Broncos have? We'll predict their record and schedule all on tomorrow's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. We'll see you then.